The 10th process of the Align, Plan and Organize domain, called Manage Suppliers, has 5 practices. The third practice is to manage supplier relationships. From a RACI charts perspective, the entities that are responsible are the head development, the head IT operations, and the head IT administration. The entity that is held accountable is the Chief Information Officer. The practice receives one input, which is the approved acquisition plans from the BAI3 process. The practice generates 3 outputs, which are the supplier roles and responsibilities, the communication and review process, and the suggested improvements, all to be used internally. The activities involved in this practice include assigning personnel who are responsible for managing the relationships with all the suppliers, and ensuring the quality of the provided service. Formal communication should be established with the suppliers, along with an agreed-on review process. Supplier contracts should be agreed on, managed, and maintained, and they should conform with the organization's standards and legal requirements. The enterprise should add provisions in the contract that allows it to review key suppliers' practices and controls. The effectiveness of the supplier relationship should be evaluated, and any necessary improvements should be identified. Supplier roles and responsibilities should be defined, and procedures to manage disputes with the suppliers should be established. The fourth practice is to manage the supplier risk. The entities that are responsible for this practice are the Chief Risk Officer, the Head Development, and the Head IT Operations. The entity that is held accountable is the Chief Information Officer. The practice receives one input, which is the results of supplier risk assessments from the APO12 process. It generates 2 outputs, which are the identified supplier risk to be used by the APO12 and BAI1 processes, and the identified contract requirements to minimize risk, to be used internally. The activities involved in this practice include identifying, monitoring, and managing supplier-related risks. Service requirements should be clearly defined in the contracts, and should include provisions to manage potential supplier risks. The fifth practice is to monitor the supplier performance. From a RACI charts perspective, the entities that are responsible are the Head Development and the Head IT Operations. The entity that is held accountable is the Chief Information Officer. The practice receives no inputs from internal or external sources, but generates 2 outputs, which are the supplier compliance monitoring criteria to be used internally, and the supplier compliance monitoring results to be used by the MEA1 process. The activities involved in this practice include defining and documenting the supplier performance monitoring criteria, aligned with the service level agreements. It should be ensured that the suppliers report regularly on these criteria. Service delivery should be monitored and reviewed that it is providing an acceptable quality of service. Supplier performance compared to alternative suppliers should be evaluated, to identify any improvement possibilities. Performance results should be recorded and assessed, and discussed with the suppliers to identify needs for improvement. Other sources that provide more insights into this process include the ISO 20000 standard, the ITIL framework, and the project management body of knowledge.